To look through all those are Jake Wallis-Simons. He is the deputy editor of the Jewish Chronicle, and the journalist and author Yasmin Alibhai Brown. Welcome to you both. And Yasmin, what do you make of Con Coughlin's suggestion that really a lot of what's happening in Israel and the occupied territories is down to provocative efforts by Iran?
There is a geopolitical game going on, and has been going on, I think, for a very long time. But here, I just want to focus on the kind of basics. The fact that a very, very heavily armed power is, facing down an ugly, smaller enemy, an ugly one. The numbers of deaths, the children who died, and actually about eviction. Eviction's the wrong word. The whole settlement project, which has been allowed to go on, and the world has done nothing. So it's a very complicated problem, and it does nobody any good to just find the simplest enemy and try and explain it. It's a huge tragedy.
I think you'd agree with that, Jake Wallis-Simons. What do you think of the international aspect of it all? Are we the problem, if you like?
Well, I mean, Yasmin's absolutely right. It's a heartbreaking situation in Israel and in Gaza. But I would depart from her analysis slightly to focus a bit more on the international dimension to it, because there's no doubt that Hamas are playing a geostrategic game, and that's a big part of the motivation for them launching this war in response to the suspended Palestinian elections, in response to the new American administration. And of course, they are trying to appeal to Iran, which is newly emboldened by the Biden administration by comparison to the Trump years, for more money and for more support. And so I think all of these things are big motivating factors for Hamas. And the evictions, which Yasmin pointed out, are not really a settlement issue. This is a property dispute. This is a situation where Arab tenants of Jewish-held properties were not paying their rent anymore. Of course, there's a backlog to the story. That those properties were in Jewish hands, and they passed into Arab hands, then back into Jewish hands again. So there is that very difficult and fraught background to it. And I'm not seeking to diminish that.
But there is also a push into East Jerusalem by the Israelis, isn't there?
My point is that these tensions have been going on for 15 years, and they have contributed towards a sense of tension and frustration overall in the region. But this moment was chosen by Hamas as a way to exploit those tensions for its own geopolitical gain. I think that really is what Con Coughlin's getting at.
Yasmin?
I really think time's up now, really, for this to become the focus for a long time. If you look at the way COVID vaccination has gone in these territories, where Israel at one point, and I think still is, is the top vaccinated region, but only for those who are of Jewish background. We have appalling.
That's untrue, Yasmin. That's untrue. That's untrue.
No,
that's
untrue.
No, Israel is not just vaccinating Jews. Israel is vaccinating Arabs, Christians, Muslims as well. Anybody who is in Israel who qualifies for a vaccine is receiving it.
May I speak without you interrupting me?
Please do.
May I speak?
Please do, but it's an important point. It needs to be corrected.
Excuse me. This is a human rights tragedy has been played out here, and very good people from Israel. I've been sitting in on debates in Israel about what's been done to Palestinians. And Netanyahu is doing this because, of course, he's about to lose his position in Israel. All of that is tied up. And I think it's really important not to forget the human cost. Those children did nothing. And the 2 Jewish women who died are also victims. Whatever's happening above ground, on the down there, people are suffering, and Palestinians have been made to suffer for far too long. I'm not defending Hamas. I'm defending the people of Palestine.
Yeah, I think as a matter of record, it is true that Israel had a very successful vaccination program, but it was for all citizens and indeed foreigners resident, regardless of their ethnic background. But let's move on, because we've got that Guardian cartoon suggesting that, to a certain extent, the horrors of what's going on in the Middle East are distracting us from the virus. Simon, what do you make, or Jake, what do you make of the decision to say we're going to have an inquiry but not yet, which the cartoonists are having fun with?
Well, I mean, this cartoon, of course, is about Gaza again, and Israel. And in fact, I was speaking to a friend of mine in Gaza on the phone the other day. He was saying that the streets were generally quieter than normal because of COVID, and now they've become silent because of the threat of war. And it feels, he was saying, just like the build-up to the last war in 2014, raising the spectre of this ground offensive, which we think is going to happen. But moving to the COVID inquiry in Britain, thank God we don't have the same level of COVID tragedy that they're suffering in Gaza at the moment, and elsewhere in the majority of the world, actually. And an inquiry is required. Let's make no bones about that. We do need to learn from the mistakes that were made in the handling of this pandemic, because unfortunately it's likely that sooner or later we're going to have a similar situation that we're going to have to deal with, and those lessons are going to be very important then. I think that the general perception of the Conservative Party and Boris Johnson's leadership in the country, as demonstrated by the recent local elections and the Tory success there, is that Boris has basically done quite a good job in a very difficult set of circumstances. I think that people are very much appreciative of the vaccine success, which has been extraordinary, outstripped only by Israel and perhaps one or two other countries, actually. And that really has eclipsed the previous sort of headlines about delaying lockdown and about having the highest death rates for a period, one of the highest death rates in the Western world, and so on and so forth. People now are focusing on the vaccine success, and because of that, they're willing to forgive a lot. They're willing to forgive the tortuous path that has led here, and they're also willing to forgive the cronyism, which has failed to stick for voters when it comes to the Tories. Yes,
I mean, obviously the pandemic is still receding here, but it's still very much a global issue. Is it right to wait until next year to start looking into the rights and wrongs of how it was handled here?
No, of course not. I mean, it has to be done. And, it's very important to remember that the families of the bereaved, I mean, I lost a sister to COVID, my mentally ill sister, in March. The families of the bereaved have not had the meeting they've demanded from the Prime Minister, to talk about their anger and frustration at the way the thing has been kicked into the long grass. And he doesn't want this inquiry. We're going to wait to see what Dominic Cummings kicks in with next. He is promising to reveal all sorts of things, but it is true that voters want to ride high on the vaccination success, which, let's not forget, was a national health operation and not won by cronies. And it saddens me that so few people are worried about the corruption when it came to contracts and so on. It does worry me, because this was a country which did have proper standards in public life. But it's true, Boris is, completely forgiven for everything. But as we'll see, I hope, in David Aronovich's piece, and that a time will come, a time of reckoning will have to come. But waiting for this inquiry until after the election, it's just unacceptable, I think.
And finally, Jake, mentioned David Aronovich there. I mean, his main point is that the opposition is divided. The government has a lot of cross-party support on the centre-right, so Mr Johnson can call the shots.
That's right. Well, Yasmin, I'm sorry to hear about your sister. I had no idea. I'm sorry to hear about that. And Yasmin's right about the inquiry being kicked into the long grass until after the election. That's a bad thing. It just looks fishy. But at the moment, the problem is that Labour, as Aronovich puts it, has no hope of winning power alone, because the centre-left is divided. And not only is the centre-left vote divided between Labour, the Lib Dems and the Scottish Nationalist Party, but Labour's support has completely collapsed in Scotland. And that means that it's got to do so well in England and Wales, better than it's ever done before, really, if it wants to have any kind of opportunity at challenging the Tories. And without that, it doesn't look like coming anytime soon with Keir Starmer's rather uninspiring managerial style, which seems to lack a lot of vision and leadership that's needed at the moment. Without all of that, as Tony Blair's been pointing out recently, the Tories basically have a free pass to reshape the country as they want, with this huge majority, combined with a levelling up agenda that's an absolute vote winner at the moment, combined with the Brexit effect, which polarises the vote even more. It means that if you're a Brexiteer, you've only got the Tories to vote for, but if you're a Remainer, you've got an option of these three different centre-left parties. The Tories do seem to be sitting pretty in a way that feels very British. I mean, that's our tradition, really. In the past few decades, we've been, a country of one dominant party, be it the Tories mainly or Tony Blair's Labour. And it feels like that sort of cycle's happening again, that the Tories really going to be in power for a very long time indeed.
OK, thank you both very much indeed for your views. This is All Out Politics. Coming up next, international